We're gonna be down here. We're not going to. And if nobody can do it, these guys can do it. So just relax. It'll be cool, okay?
We live in a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It is in that environment of high speed, high stress chaos that you as a leader must make decisions, communicate those decisions, then ultimately execute those decisions. Your ability to do so will determine your success or failure. Welcome to Decide, Communicate, Execute. Time to lock and load. Here's Gene.
Good morning, folks. Gene Blanton here. Welcome to this episode of Decide, Communicate, Execute. You know, what we're all about here is equipping leaders to do the major function that they have to do, and that's making decisions, communicating those decisions, and executing those decisions. Leaders have always had to do that, but in today's environment, the ground has shifted. We live in a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so how do you lay a framework with so much at stake? And we mostly deal with business owners, entrepreneurs who are leading businesses. How do you learn these skills? How do you learn to consistently make good decisions? How do you learn to communicate those decisions and execute those in this very fragile environment? Well, we look to the United States Marine Corps. That and some of the other services have a model there that's specifically designed to operate in this type of environment. So we've got a great program today. I'm going to talk to you today about confronting reality. Matt, if you'll bring up that first one. We always like to review here. And for those of you that are listening, if you'll go to decidecommunicateexecute.com, you can see a link to the actual video. And so I know that we're a visual society. I'm visual. I learned that way. And so try to incorporate slides into everything that we do so you not only can hear this, but if you have the opportunity, if you're just listening, to go back online and see the corresponding slides that go with it. When we talk about decision-making and communication and execution, frameworks are always great in trying to communicate specific concepts. And so we use Boyd's O.O.D.A loop. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And usually at the beginning of our programs, we'll review this with you. But I want you to see it today in the context of what we're going to be talking about in confronting reality. So how this works in combat or in business, or if you're playing a football or basketball game, you observe what's going on. That passes through your orientation. Our orientation are made up of several different components there. Our cultural traditions, how we analyze and synthesize, what our genetic heritage is, in essence, what we're strong at, what we're weak at, what's been our previous experiences, and then also what impacts it is new information. Out of that orientation, we make a decision. That decision is either intuitive or it's analytical. Most of the time, it's intuitive, and that's why our orientation needs to be so powerfully set that even when we make intuitive decisions, they are based in reality. Then we act, we execute, we make a decision and try to execute or fulfill that decision. When you observe, orient, decide, act, and you can do that quicker than your opponent. In the business world, if you can do that quicker, more successfully than your client's expectations, then you win. And so there's a great book out there that we're going to be talking about called Confronting Reality. It's by Larry Bossidy and by Charan. I challenge all of you that are in a leadership role to read that. And it really fits right in with what we do. When we go and engage with the client, and like I said, we're in the advisory business, we're in the leadership development business, and so we'll go in first and do what we call rigorous analysis. My partner, Wade Myers, was on the program last week, he talked about this concept. And so in that, we're gathering the intelligence of what's going on in your business battlefield, both internally and externally. What are the capabilities of your competitors? Also, what are your internal capabilities? And then you synthesize that into a holistic view to produce a battlefield insight that is greater than the sum of its parts. Then out of that, you develop a very bold strategy. That's how you win, a uniquely better battle plan to how you win in the marketplace, and then you decisively execute that. That's done through discipline, transformation, alignment, the integration of your people, your processes, your technologies into one synergized force to execute that winning strategy. But it all starts in gathering the battlefield intelligence and assessing the friendly forces. That can be done and has to be done. But one of the biggest obstacles to it is the inability for many of us to confront reality. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. In his book, if you go ahead, Matt, and go to the next slide, please. In Confronting Reality, doing what matters to get things right, I'm going to share with you several quotes out of this book today. And I'm challenging you to do something that's hard for us in a leadership position to do, especially if we've had some modicum of success. But that is really what I'm going to challenge you to do today is question or ask yourself, do I see myself in any of these statements that Bossidy and Charan wrote? Both of these guys have dealt at the Fortune 500 level. They've been writing for years. I love their stuff. They've got great insights. And we see these behaviors amongst entrepreneurial leaders ourselves. Howard H. Stevenson, who my partner Wade Myers actually studied under at Harvard, but I have quoted him for 30-plus years, he says that entrepreneurship is not an effect or a particular type of individual. It's a behavior. And so as advisors, we're in the behavior modification business. And so what causes the greatest consistent damage? Listen to what Bossidy and Charan have to say. The fact is that the greatest consistent damage to businesses and their owners is the result not of poor management technique, but of the failure, sometimes willful, to confront reality. I can't tell you the number of times that we've seen this, Matt, is that we'll go into a business, and the first thing we do is the assessment, okay? And we're looking at how much the business is worth. We're looking at the monthly performance from a trailing 12 months, trailing 36 months, financial performance, and then we'll look at the strategic context, what's happening within the industry. And so we lay out reality. We're non-biased in what we do. We don't have a dog in this hunt. And we're not trying to, but sometimes we kind of kiddingly call that conversation "your baby's ugly" conversation, because the reality of what a guy or gal's business is worth, and what the reality of it is sometimes a wide gap. And so this guy pulls up, he comes to us, he thinks he's riding this great Harley Davidson. And after we've done our assessment, we find out he's riding a little tricycle, and he's got one of two choices. He can go home to Mama and say, "Hey, we're going to have, when we sell this thing, we're going to have to adjust to a tricycle lifestyle," or they can get serious about building it. But the point that I make is that confronting reality is a tough pill to swallow, especially amongst us entrepreneurial leaders, when this is our baby. I mean, we've grown this. This was our idea. We've and certainly we think because it's the greatest business in the world, and everybody else must be willing to pay a premium for that. So that's one of the things. The next thing that he says there is to confront reality is to recognize the world as it is, not as you wish it to be, and then have the courage to do what must be done, not what you'd like to do. Again, we see this amongst the really good entrepreneurs, and our success has primarily been from the standpoint of our selection process. But any client that we've dealt with more than 12 months, we've been able to work with those leaders and move the needle and more than double the value of their business. But here's kind of the pattern that's historically taken place. We've confronted them with reality. There's that kind of initial shock. There's that initial pushback. There's the initial emotionalism. But the really good ones, and that we're getting better and better at choosing those, have the ability to fight through that and then have the courage to know what needs to be done. They accept, hey, this is the reality, and then they move forward and have the courage with what needs to be done. On the next slide, you'll see there he asked a question, again, put yourself in this picture. If this is not you and not me on many occasions. He says this: though business people like to think of themselves as realists, the fact is that wishful thinking, denial, and other forms of avoiding reality are deeply embedded in most corporate cultures. If this is not a fact, I don't know what is. I had the great privilege, Matt, of having Zig Ziglar as my Sunday school teacher, and he used to always say denial is not a river in Egypt, and always talked about the concept of denial. But there is the human nature of us individually, and then as leaders, our personality becomes deeply embedded into that corporate culture. And so if you, as a leader, if your default is to push back, your default is the wishful thinking, your default is to avoid reality, there's going to be a problem. And it's going to have poor results in whatever it is that you're trying to do if you cannot confront reality. And then you've heard us talk about this before, the whole concept of confirmation of bias. Here's what he says: it's basic human behavior for many, if not most people, to deny reality and embrace unreality when the reality is more that they can bear. People get in the habit of finding ways to confirm their own thinking, which in time creates barriers to seeing the realities that differ from those they're comfortable with. Again, we see that one of the great privileges we have, and let me make something very clear while I'm talking to you here. When I'm talking about entrepreneurs and leaders we encounter and everything else, this is us too. I mean, we're entrepreneurs, we're leaders, we have these same biases, so we're no better or no different than anybody that I'm speaking of here. But here's the challenge we see all the time. You have statistically showing over the next 5 to 10 years, there's actually $10 trillion worth of value that's been created by entrepreneurial leaders, primarily us old graybeard baby boomers, that is about to transition. Now, that unfortunately, a vast majority of that will not transition in the form of a sale of a company. According to the exit planning, the International Business Brokers Association, actually only 1 out of 4 companies that are put up for sale actually result in a sale. George Gendron, former editor-in-chief of Inc. magazine, said the dirty little secret of entrepreneurial life in America is that the overwhelming majority of small business owners work a lifetime to create a company only to discover when it's time to sell that it is worthless. And so even though the facts are this, it's a proven fact, you will exit your business. It may be when you take a dirt nap. It may be in the process of divorce. It may be in the process of disability or a disagreement amongst owners, all types of things. Over half of the exits that take place in the business world today are unplanned and are forced type events. But yet with this reality, it's almost like a guy trying to sell life insurance. If people want to, just avoid it and think that's not going to happen to me, here's the reality, and that's why you better make sure you have your act together spiritually and know where you're going when it's all said and done, because the reality is you're going to spend a whole lot more time on the other side of this life than you are on this side of it. But yet, when thought of that is more than we can bear. So we deny reality. We want to embrace unreality. And so I challenge business owners that own a business today, that are leaders there, to embrace this reality and understand what is transpiring and then have the courage to act on it. Here's what they say too. Some people try to fend off disruptive forces of change by denouncing them or ignoring them. I meant to do it. I got another set of slides there where I'm showing the three monkeys sitting there with, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. That is what us leaders have a tendency to do. But in this environment, Bossidy and Charan writes, confronting reality has to become a leadership priority of the highest order. It's a non-negotiable behavior for everyone at all levels of an organization. What Boyd talks about in his O.O.D.A loop is that when you observe and then it passes through orientation, what you're specifically looking for are what he calls mismatches. You're not looking for confirmation of what you already believe. You are searching for things that aren't fitting within your particular narrative. It's something that's going against the dialogue. And that's what good leaders are doing. In the Marines have a combat hunter program. A couple of Marines have written a book on it that we'll be addressing here later. The concept of staying left of bang. Bang is when the IED goes off. Bang is when you lose that customer. Bang is when the market drops out. Well, the idea is staying left of bang. What do you have to do to stay left of bang? Right of bang is IED goes off. You call in the medevac, you return fire, etc. That's a losing proposition. And so in the Combat Hunter program, the Marines come up with the concept of staying left of bang, of proactively looking for all the telltale signs of IEDs and proactively put that into the culture. It's much easier to react when the IED doesn't go off, when you kill the bad guy while he's trying to bury it in the ground, than deal with all the pain, sorrow, death on the other side of it. And so that's what leaders have to do in today's society. Here's another component, and this is sometimes when we do our initial analysis, we are bringing the reality of the outside world. A lot of time, financial analysis that's done internally with the company is comparing that company's with its previous performance. In essence, it is looking inward. We lovingly call that they're drinking their own bathwater. But here's what has to be done according to Bossidy and Charan. Leaders who've learned to look at their businesses from the outside in, including working backwards from the end user of their products and services, have a head start in confronting reality. Many times we've seen this. You'll have an owner of a business who, when he or she first started that business, they were out in the field. They were having direct contact with that customer, with that client. They were getting specific feedback about what was going on. And as is inevitable when you grow a business, they started taking on more executive type roles and actually would lose touch with the client and with the customer and with the knowledge that made them successful to start with. They'd start doing what Boyd called in Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. If you're not looking outward, both at your client and at the shifting forces in the marketplace, it starts what he calls atrophy. In essence, just like if you have an arm in a sling that's been broken, that muscle becomes weaker and weaker and weaker if it's not been used. And the same thing happens in the business world. So having a head start in confronting reality starts in looking from an outward focus rather than always looking at an inward focus. And then here's one thing too. Um, Gathering information from outside is not a one-time or yearly event. It has to be a real-time process, a social mechanism with frequency and consistency. This idea of this probably really hit me, I'm guessing, about 10 years old, 10 years ago. When you get to be my age, the years fly by, and I can't really I can't remember if I had breakfast or if I did what it was. But I do remember a statement that was made by a client one time. I'd asked them on a market industry there in a really fast-paced, fast-moving industry that they were in. I said, why don't we print out that report? And he made a statement there, and he said, Gene, he said, by the time we print out that report, it's already old. And so what we see there many times, if businesses are looking outward, they'll look outward at the one-time annual meeting, or every 2 or 3 years if they've got their 5-year plan in place. But it has to be a real-time process where you're constantly looking outward. Really, outward-looking companies are constantly challenging the status quo. They are constantly looking at what their competitors are doing. They're constantly looking at market forces, i.e. taxation, regulation, litigation, things that you may not necessarily have control of, but they're always keeping an eye on those by having a culture that is indeed a social mechanism with frequency and consistency. The next one there he talks about, and this should be obvious, the job starts with straight talk at the top. A leader can't expect realism from others without setting the example herself. Here's what Bossidy and Charan wrote, and it's right on the money. Believe it or not, and I may have mentioned this before, but the United States Marine Corps has a concept that they call the moral obligation to dissent. Many times in a group, especially a very cohesive group, you'll get groupthink, where nobody wants to rock the boat, nobody wants to challenge the status quo, and people will not speak up and confront realism. And so if the leader's not confronting it, if he or she's not confronting realism, they certainly can't expect that realism to be prevalent throughout the organization. I shared before in wonderful little outhouses when I was with the Marines in 05 and 07 over in wonderful little outhouses like Fallujah and Ramadi. There'd be a battalion-sized movement. Now, this is led by a lieutenant colonel that's way up the food chain. And he would lay down a battle plan, and then he would ask for insights there. And you'd get some young sergeant who's way down the food chain. Sir, with all respect, this is going to get us killed. And so sometimes the leader would say, Sergeant, what's your plan? How would you change this? So the sergeant would put forth his game plan, and they would modify the battle plan. At other times, the leader would say, I've taken that into consideration. Here's the reality. If we don't do it this way, and going into danger, we're Marines, that's what we get paid for. But the bottom line was, it was a culture of trust whereby people could confront reality. They felt safe in speaking to power and safe in speaking to things that went against the status quo. So on the next one there, he talks about, he said, the lack of the second causes the first. Listen to this. 2 leadership qualities have become absolutely indispensable today, and they aren't on the usual list. The first is business acumen, more commonly called business savvy. The second is a need to know, or to put it another way, a refusal to take anything for granted, and insatiable curiosity about what's new and different. On the first one, that business savvy, and that's where we've been successful in dealing with really great entrepreneurs, is where they're not thinking every day just at the tactical level. How do I get bigger, faster, more profitable? They're looking, how do I strategically place myself on this business battlefield and go into an arena that nobody else can, or they're going to have difficulty following me. And if they do follow me, they cannot execute at the level my organization can. That's really what he's talking about. The second one there is the idea of that intellectual curiosity. I hope that the people listening to this, surely there, that you are listening because you want to learn and want to grow and have insights, even if you disagree with what I say. By listening to outside ideas and concepts, it at least promulgates and forces you to think, good, bad, or ugly. I agree with that. I don't agree with that. I never thought of that. But the other thing that he's talking about there is this idea of having an insatiable curiosity. I see it time and time again. The difference between really great leaders is that sense of intellectual curiosity. They always want to learn. They're reading, they're attending events, they're always looking to learn, and then they question everything. In business plans that we've reviewed. I call that RQA, the ruthless questioning of assumptions. And for a leader today, that needs to be a skill that's at the forefront. The next one down there he talks about is cultural change. Operations, people, and organizational process known in combination as the corporate culture have to change as the business model evolves or gets reinvented. You know, any company that's been able to survive over a period of years will go through a J curve, a growth period, and then they'll kind of max out, and then unless proactive, what Schumpeter used to call creative destruction, in essence, you're going in and revamping and taking it to a new level, then you will start seeing that decay take place. And so always, as the business model evolves, and understand it's constantly evolving, leaders should back up and look at it from a strategic standpoint, always be looking outside, and make sure that the model is evolving and getting reinvented. Then we see down there culture reality, and we see this all the time. Many CEOs who describe their cultures in glowing terms are talking about what they'd like it to be and not necessarily what it is. I see this all the time, and entrepreneurs and leaders should be proud of their people, but many times their perception of the culture is only fed to them very selectively, and they're always hearing back what they want to hear, surrounded by yes people who are always nodding and yes sir and yes ma'am and kind of putting us leaders on a pedestal. But the fact is, take a look at your culture. Is it really what you think it is? The next there he said demand reality. Ultimately, the organizations that work most effectively will be those in which leadership demands reality and develops a system of rewards and penalties that put a premium on realism. The rewards are for reality, and the penalties are for unreality. The next one there, he says there's no free throws. When you put in new initiatives there, it's not just about launching. You have to make sure that it is successful when you do it, because failure affects the whole psyche of the organization. And then he said unreality is often the consequence of time-honored good leadership practices. And for time's sake, I'll drop down there. He said, this is how organizations develop blind spots that lead them down the wrong road. In essence, you've got a team that's worked together for years. They've been successful. And if you're not careful, you can develop these blind spots. And here's what he said the irony is. The irony is the more successful the business, the more likely it is to have blind spots. And so I hope you'll this week make at the top of your list the idea of confronting reality. And if we can help you do that, you can contact me, gene.blanton@boldmore.com. Go see our website at boldmore.com if you want to see more about the show or listen to past episodes. Go to decidecommunicateexecute.com. And if it just comes down to it, pick up the phone and call me, 214-289-5785. 5000. This is Gene Blanton. I hope you've enjoyed today. We'll look forward to talking to you next week. Semper Fi. We're out.